Today's webinar is about change management. A fool with a tool is still a fool, presented by none other than our own Greg Gilda. He is an ITIL V2 master, an ITIL V3 Foundation certified IT professional, and has a proven history in leadership consulting, ITIL implementation and developmental stewardship of all ITIL best practice disciplines, including change management, problem management, incident management, ITIL configuration and release management. He has been in the IT industry for over 20 plus years and has provided ITIL consultative skills to numerous clients regarding ITIL best practices and critical success factors required for smooth implementation and operation. He has been with Flycast Partners almost since its inception and has played a key role in the overall success of our organization. Before we get started, Greg, I'm going to explain a little bit about our organization, Flycast Partners. We're here to deliver a seriously amazing IT experience. We were founded and staffed by personnel that have many years of experience in the IT space, took the best ideas from these collective experiences and added the best components necessary to grow and become a leading value-added reseller in the North American IT market. We offer best-in-class implementation services and training in ITSM, ITAM, workload automation, capacity optimization, artificial intelligence, enterprise service management, along with many, many others, all using ITIL best practice. Our professional services can easily scale up or down to meet the IT needs of any customer, regardless of size, complexity, or budgetary restrictions. We offer implementation services both on-site and remote, as well as training to help reinforce your company's long-term IT success. Our ongoing remote administration and support service offerings will enable your organization to focus on your normal day-to-day operations, saving you both precious time and money. I encourage you to reach out to us directly at 844-FLYCAST, that's 844-359-2278, or simply go to our website and chat with one of our ITSM specialists there in the right-hand corner of our website. On our website, you will find a variety of different webinars that are coming up. Next week, of course, being a fool without a service desk creates adhocracy. Definitely a presentation you don't want to miss from Greg Gilda, as well as various training that we offer here at Flycast Partners that you can take advantage of, sign up for, or send to your coworkers. In addition to that, there are a variety of white papers and data sheets that you can download about many different products that we offer here at Flycast Partners. And here's some of our publishing partners that we do business with that we can help you out with multiple tools. Without further delay, I am going to go ahead and turn this over to none other than Greg Gilda and let him take it from here. Greg, I have passed control over to you, sir.
Let's talk a little bit about change management, not about tools, but actually about the process itself. So today, we're really going to be talking about the change management, one of the series of our Fool series. A fool with a tool is still a fool. And it's really titled this way to illustrate that no matter what tools you buy, right, in the end, and we certainly as tool representatives have many a tool that we can offer. But no matter what tool you buy, if you get one, it still doesn't help you get your process done, right? You have to have the process in place. And when it comes to change management in particular, you have to have an understanding of what that process looks like, acts like, or you want it to act like, so that you can realize those processes in-house and place them in a tool in a way that allows the tool to automate things, well, that are beneficial. We don't want the tool to automate stuff that's going to hurt us, and making automatic mistakes or having the process automatically run really fast when it's doing things really wrong is really bad. So we'll talk a little bit about change management. If you don't create change, change will create you. And what we're really trying to say with this is, if you don't create a process by which you manage these changes in your organization, your changes are going to end up creating what you do every day. Monday morning, the blues come. We have things that changed over the weekend, and, well, we have to get them fixed. So that means that that wasn't what we were planning on doing on Monday, or maybe it was. Maybe we just secretly know that on Monday there's going to be, some brush fire or several of them to put out. But we don't want to have to be in that reactive mode. If we have a process, we can help mitigate these risks. We can help understand them, and we can help make sure that Monday morning we don't sing the blues, right? So this is a guideline, guys. It's not all inclusive. It's not going to tell you everything there is about the process, more of a primer, really. But we definitely are taking a process perspective rather than a tool perspective in this case. So by definition, right, it's one of our IT service management disciplines, and it's really here to ensure that we have standardized methods and procedures. Standardized methods should really be underlined because it's important that we standardize and do it twice the same way, hence the concept of a process. We want to make sure that we do efficient and prompt handling of all changes. Efficient and prompt is important because if we're slow, we're perceived as slow in handling the changes, and everyone's going to hate this anyway, right? Because they have to fill out documentation and tell them what they're going to change, and people hate that. But if you have efficiency and promptness in the handling of these requests, then it can go a little bit smoother. If you don't, then people are really going to hate it. And we're doing these changes to a controlled IT infrastructure. So we've agreed that this environment, whatever it is, production, for sure, right, maybe others, is going to be managed with change. We want to make sure that these areas in the organization are controlled. Now remember, test is production for someone. So that means that's an environment you might want to control with at least a modicum of change, because we want to minimize the number and impact of related incidents. If things break because we change stuff, then we have to mitigate that somehow. We have to have a process by which we say, let's evaluate the changes, let's evaluate what could happen. So we're gonna embark on the journey of discussion regarding what that process can look like. We do changes really reactively or proactively, right? We react to things that have happened, like, uh-oh, that broke, let's change it and make it better. We do it proactively too, because sometimes we get told by an outside force that we must behave in the following way, we must enact the following process, we must do the following adherence to guidelines. And that sometimes means new infrastructure, modifications to existing infrastructure. In other words, we're changing things at somebody else's behest, right? Look, I've just gone forward one too many slides, so I'm going to back this up. So why do this? Why do change management at all? Change management can help ensure that we have standardized methods for going about this process, right? We want to do it in a standard, repeatable way so that when people belly up to the change management bar, they get the same treatment every time. We want efficient and prompt handling for these changes, because if we slow down, it's just going to cause issues. And we want to maintain the balance between the need for doing the change and the impact of doing the change, right? Because, if we look at an otherwise stable system, why would we make it different? Only because it's going to be better on the other side of the fence. If it's going to be worse, or if there's a possibility that it's going to be worse, and that possibility looms large, you want to weigh the change. Moving forward is not without its bumps and bruises. We want to move forward without, moving forward in the dark, so the change process helps light the way. Change management acts as a control function if you're doing config, guys. So if you're making a configuration management effort, you must have this process in place first. If you want to truly understand something, try to change it. That's an important thing to think about, because when you go to change it and make it different, you have to know what it currently is. Otherwise, it's a little difficult to make it different than it currently is. How do you know you're not making it the same? So you have to be able to verify your existing conditions, find out what's really there, and that understanding can yield all kinds of benefits, of course, but all kinds of, I can't unsee those things, right? Things you maybe didn't want to see or know or understand that were going on. It's okay. It'll all get better in the end. So we know that this lives in the ITIL v3 service delivery wheel, right? The change process. And of course, ITIL does define this as saying it lives right here in service transition, when we transition a service from what it used to be to what it is now, which I agree with. But it also lives kind of over on the service operations side of the house. Look how sensitive I am. The service operations side of the house here. That means when we're operating services, sometimes things break, and I have to file change requests to make them not break or not broken anymore. So we also see, in addition to service transition, changes happen over here in service operation as we're making the services run, and we need to repair them so that they can continue to run. And of course, as we design new services, then we evoke the change process when it comes in and gets transitioned to production. Reasons, places where changes come from include incident management, problem management, configuration management, project management, and the software development lifecycle. Lots of folks think that the software development lifecycle is change management, but the truth is it's just a feeder for the process. It's just another input. We produce code that has to be applied to production, and that code evokes a change because we're modifying something in production. Projects also evoke changes to production with new stuff that they add. So does configuration management changes, changing the structure of something in our CMDB and in the actual data center. Problem management, of course, from a ramifications perspective and rectification perspective as we go to fix those problems. And incident management, as we go to fix those as well, will leverage data and can sometimes cause us to evoke the change process. So where to start? You can look at what a change is, right? Everybody's going to look at this a little differently, but it's very important to look at the things that are common change requests that you do. Certainly, if you have a CMDB, everything in there is going to be tracked with this process. Servers, planned reboots of servers, network components, databases, storage arrays, things that we modify like this, right? Desktops, monitoring tools, anticipated workloads. Now, desktops is one of those things you have to look at not on an individual basis, but in a group basis. Right? We are changing our image for all the desktops that we use as a standard. That's probably a change. We are going to change the resolution that your monitor is running at on your machine. That's probably not a change. So you've got to think about the size of that desktop change. Anticipated workloads as well, right? If we're not expecting a particular bundle of work to come through, then we may want to file a change to say, tonight we're going to be doing an exorbitant amount of processing. This is really an awareness change request. Right? It's not so much that we're modifying the infrastructure as it is that we're about to pound a lot more stuff through the infrastructure than we normally ever would. Be on the lookout for things to go wrong. It is a change in processing. What's not a change is another thing you can look at, right? Maybe this is easier because if you drop the stuff out that I would never file a change from the following things, then everything left over must be what you're gonna file changes against. So office moves, password resets, adds, subtracts to users. These things are typically not controlled with a change process. So there are places you can look to say, we don't do changes for any of that stuff, makes sense. But that starts to mean then that the rest of the stuff we do process change requests for. We just have to pay attention to that dividing line. We don't want to do too little, for sure, because if you're making changes to a controlled environment, you got to know what's different today from yesterday. Otherwise, you don't know why it doesn't work anymore when you come in. Check your environment to see what's in place. Anything that's, can be leveraged for you to help you get over this hump is going to be huge. You don't have to invent everything from scratch, and that's why we have this process discussion, in fact, so that you don't have to. These ideas that we're conveying are really best practice. Interview your existing actors, find out what's going on with them. People are going to say, I don't want anything to do with your change process, but that's okay. I don't always have a choice about that. But we want to have findings about the existing method so that we can then target those findings later and say, look, we found that before we had this process, this is how it used to work. This is now how it works. Better, right? Hopefully we're ticking off all the boxes for everything better. Remember, just because you've always done it a certain way, and many organizations will wave this flag, hey, we've always done it like this, which is great. And if the results are just stellar, then hey, continue. But if they're not, if you're looking to make things different, if you really do want to improve these processes, particularly around a very, very important control process like change management, then it becomes an opportunity to create that cultural change to get you there. Which, speaking of which, this particular quote addresses that quite nicely. The first step towards change is awareness. The second is acceptance. Telling people about the fact that the process exists and they should ought to follow it is very different from actually having them follow it. You never know who's going to say what to these kinds of demands, right? Who's going to bust out and say, no, I'm not going to do it. We have rebels in our midst about it. So you want to make sure that they accept the ideas that are here and they can see the benefits of why to do this. And usually that involves starting with a good strategy, a good foundation for building your process, right? Figure out an owner, who's the change manager, what's their role. And I've got some bullets here that help indicate, right? They act as the CAB, for example. So they are the change advisory board if there's a standard change that comes through that does need someone to approve, like the change manager, to be sure that it adheres to standard policy, I's dotted, T's crossed, so they can act as the change advisory board for other things too, like the meeting, and they'll act to chair the change advisory board meeting, and they can then override on the behalf of the change advisory board for change requests. As long as you document that in your policy, you're good. Should review changes for accuracy, right? So they make sure that the information in there isn't just an X for a backup plan, that there's actually a plan. The change manager's job isn't to know if that plan is going to work. That's somebody else's review job, usually the technical review group that looks at the change next. But the change manager is the accountable party for the change process. This is where the buck stops. If the change process goes wrong, you go talk to that person. And then you add additional staff, of course, to help manage these changes and get them reviewed from a logging standpoint. Place it within a controls environment, guys. Don't stick it inside of, your support group environments or your other environments for which daily changes are things that they don't want to have to go through any process for. If you have a security group or a controls group, an audit group, these guys are used to having things placed under lockdown, placed under control. And really, again, if your environment is working and someone says, I'm going to change something about it tonight, you got to look at that skeptically, because it was working, or we're counted upon to make it work. Do you want to introduce that risk? So don't put a fox in your henhouse. Make sure that your process is actually helmed by folks who are in a part of the organization where that matters. Develop your policy. That comes first in the chicken or the egg debate, your policy and then your process. Policies are the laws, process are the means of enforcing them or ensuring that we don't step outside of those boundaries. Develop those process steps, mapping them to a RACI diagram, right? Responsible, accountable, consulted, and informed are the parties in a RACI diagram. And then the roles have a particular job. Are you going to be consulted? That means we're going to ask you for permission. Do we need to ask for permission? Depends on who you are in the process, right? Where you actually act. So developing that helps everybody understand what their job is. And then, of course, mapping that to a swim lane diagram so that you can produce something that says, look, this is what your real job is. If you're a reviewer in the technical review board, this is what you do, and this is where you come into the process. Select the CAB members, because a change advisory board, which goes beyond the technical review board, right? Change advisory board is there to manage business requirements for changes. Technical requirements, can IT do this change without impacting themselves and or others? And then the business says, hey, do we trust that IT says everything is good because they're proposing this change on Wednesday night? Is that okay? Big business changes have a CAB where the change advisory board meets and discusses it, but they're not the technical review people. That's important to note. Content for the request for change, dates and times and the type of change and the goal of the change. These things are important, especially dates and times, because when the change goes in, means I know where to look for the potential disruption to service. If I don't have this documented correctly, then I have no idea which changes occurred yesterday to know whether or not we should look at yesterday's changes for today's outage. So you want to make sure that the dates and times are right there, like tickets to a sporting event, guys. You can't use them to attend an event not held on that day. You got to buy the ticket for tonight's game. It's not going to be good for tomorrow night's game. Description, details of the change should be out there. Backup plan, implementation plan, testing plan, communication plan, where appropriate, right? These types of changes, they get bigger and bigger, should have these plans in place. The change manager's job is to be sure the plans exist when the change goes up in its scope and becomes more and more major. However, they're not there to understand whether the plans are true. They don't know if the testing plan is really how they're going to test. That's for the technical review people to verify, or the business to verify, the CAB to say, yeah, we have business people on tap. They're going to check that out. So you want to make sure you know who the resources are and identify them in that change request. Scope. Scope of the change request is vital to know, because the scope determines how big it is. It's really based on two different factors, the risk and the impact. And when we talk about risk, we'll get there in a minute, but when we talk about risk, we're going to see that it isn't like a percentage of likelihood of failure. Typically, scope has breakouts like major, significant, minor, routine, those types of words, so that we can understand that major changes are the ones that are probably going to go all the way to the cab. We're touching a critical business system. It's pretty important. Significant changes, there's still a substantial risk here. They may not all go to the cab, the change advisory board, the business meeting, but most of them will. Minor changes or routine changes even below that, for low risk and impact or highly repeatable, we do them every day. We push a button, we restore the service if it goes wrong, right, for the routine changes. This helps us keep a good handle on the overall scope of the change and helps us understand where the change should go for review. Because if I look at risks, high, medium, low, right, the real word that we want to use for the risk is back out is impossible or unproven. And there are many changes that happen in organizations where you cannot back out. You must roll forward. There's nothing else you can do. Or you've never backed out. You know what? We've never tried to restore this system, but we are changing it. So we hope that we get it right because we've never done it before. Those are all flags that say the risk of this is high. Hey, we have no experience with it, and we can't roll backwards, guys. So is that a risk you're willing to take? Rather than trying to figure out the likelihood of failure. Because I promise, if the likelihood of failure came out to be 5%, 5% chance of failure, right? If you had some magical algorithm you could punch in, Mr. Murphy would do you the dirty, and that 5% would come up, and now what? Do I know how to put it back together? No. Okay, well, that's important, right? That's the important data you really want to gather, because we don't know how to do this part. So use this to help determine the risk and impact. Don't use words like high, medium, low. As you can see, those words don't really have any meaning. Words like, hey, you know what? The impact is critical or revenue generating systems. These are critical systems to our business. These are the things we recover for a living, right? Because if we don't recover them in our DR plan, then we're out of money. Or important systems, right? It could be rendered non-functional, or non-critical or redundant systems. When we combine impacts and risk, hey, a critical revenue stream system is impossible or unproven to restore the services for, and we are changing that on the weekend. Does someone need to know? Right? Probably the business does and everybody else. So extremely important when these things are combined. That way you can get the change to go to the right people. More strategy, you guys want to figure out the change meeting schedule. When's it going to happen? Wednesdays at 2. Right, or whatever time of day it is. When the cab meets, they want to discuss changes that are reviewed by everybody else, the technical review board. Really anything that was bound for the cab would have had at least change manager review and the technical review board review, because we needed to make sure that technically the change was feasible. Any changes that were pending in a previous cab session would also be brought up for discussion there, because kind of critical. Have that information brought back up if we pended it, especially if our dates are going to expire. A change calendar showing our scheduled changes. Remember, during that meeting, changes that are being discussed should be represented by the person who knows what the change is about. Don't expect some manager or something to speak to the change if they don't know. You be there to represent your change. Also make sure that you identify who your emergency cab members are and how they will convene. Usually that's virtual. Right? Most tools anymore allow virtual meetings to take place, so you can say, I voted yes, and you can vote yes, and now we've both voted yes, and we didn't have to have a meeting to do that. So if that's the way you're going to do it, and you know who your people are that are your emergency change members, then they can get notified of the changes that are upcoming, and therefore be involved to be able to weigh in, either yes or no, is it okay to do this? Determine your change types. ITIL defines 3, right? Standard, normal, and emergency. Standard changes are highly repeatable with no real impacts, right? These are oftentimes presented to the cab as a, please, may I do these without ever coming to the cab again. That way, we don't have to ever bring them up any further than the change manager. They could even be automatically approved, right? The tool that you're using might allow that. Normal changes are the ones that are going to always go through the full review process because there's always some aha moment, some potential gotcha with those. So we're going to make sure that the right people review all the way up to the cab if needed. And emergency changes are really the break-fix work we do. IDLE isn't very specific about this. But the truth of it is, if you have emergencies for poor planning, then poor planning on your part does constitute an emergency on mine. And that's not how it works. So emergency changes should really not be filed just because I didn't plan well. They should be filed because I really have house on fire, there's an incident, and I must change something, and I need permission because I'm going to take this whole system down. And that's going to affect a lot of people. So would that be okay? It's going to affect these other guys too, but I have to do it in order to restore service. So somebody used to say that's all right. I also include other change types to think about. Unscheduled, right? Unplanned, unscheduled, whatever word you want to use for this. These are the changes that are normally thought of as emergencies, right? If you use just the IDLE standards. But then I can't separate the poor planning from the break fix. Here I can. I just say, look, this is unscheduled. This is poorly planned. Right? You can call it poor planning if you want to. Those changes we want to diminish the occurrence of. Emergencies too, obviously. But since emergencies are for incidents, then we can track these unscheduled changes in a more easy way and chase down the how come it is the changes are always coming in at the last minute. That's usually where you get bit with last minute changes. Latent changes are just documentation changes, right? They're just updating your paper trail. Nobody is approving these because the change has occurred in the name of incident management. So the incident folks carried their flag in and say, yes, we're doing this change because things are on fire and we have to do it. And doing the change wouldn't take anybody else down who wasn't down. Right? Look, the entire system is already down. Me bouncing the service isn't going to bring a whole bunch of other people down. Emergency changes are filed in cases where that would happen. Latent changes are after the fact are filed in cases where, yeah, you know, we're just going to fix it in the name of incident management and move forward. Faced with the choice between changing one's mind and proving there's no need to do so. Almost everyone gets busy on the proof. People don't like to change their mind about process. People don't like to get involved in your process. People hate change, and this is labeled change. So yeah, there's a bunch of stuff not working in your favor when you try to make this process light up in your organization. You want to make sure that the folks who are setting about proving there's no need for them to change their mind about how to approach this, that they have good reasons to change their mind. Legitimate reasons. Reasons from a business standpoint, reasons from a process standpoint, reasons from a, you know what, you're going to actually spend less time in break-fix land if you just do this stuff up front standpoint. Probably a lot of good reasons to help battle these off. Each organization might be different. More strategy, guys. Think about the statuses of the change, right? Draft changes are still being built. Submitted changes are ready for review. Any change that's in a status of in review, right? There might be a separate review status for each step in technical review, in, you know, whatever the next review step is that you might have. Once they are all reviewed, they could go to the cab if they're supposed to. If the scope is big enough, that's a trigger to say go to the cab. If the scope isn't big enough, then that's a trigger, you know, reviewed would be a trigger that says, okay, we're just going to automatically approve it because everybody else has looked and there's no cab meeting ahead, so I'll approve that request. Pending changes, you supply a reason, you tell me why we can't move forward. On hold changes, you also supply a reason, except this is a manager decision. Pending changes usually happen because we don't have enough information or somebody wasn't here to represent it. But an on-hold change says management decided not to move forward. We'd like to change, we'd like everything about it, but we're not going to do it now. So we'll just hold it. Rejected changes, of course, can't be performed. Withdrawn changes were, hey, we decided we didn't need the change after all. We filed it, we got it started in the process, and look, after some investigation, we don't really need the change. We're at the right version. And then approved is the magic dust so that we understand the change has been approved, completed, of course. Because once we're done, once we complete our change, then we want to indicate if we were successful, if we had issues with our change implementation, and sometimes this happens, right? All the best laid plans of mice and men fall apart the minute you start doing the change and it all goes wrong. That's not what I expected when you get in there. So success with issues usually means you had to use a hammer, but you did get the change done. Failure means, yeah, I used a hammer and I broke a bunch of stuff. It just did not work. It failed. Didn't do what it was supposed to. Backed out means I broke so many things that I actually had to put it back the way it was. This is why that risk factor is so important, because I don't have an option to back out if I've never done it before. And we'd hate to have that happen where the change went in, failed to do its job, didn't fix the memory leak or didn't correct the issue with the product. However, it didn't hurt anything either, so we left it alone. That's a failure. Backed out is different. Backed out is it went in and we had to put it back because it was that bad. So we just need to understand that when we go to assess our risks, right? If we don't know how to do this part, we're in trouble. Withdrawn, again, these are statuses or sub-statuses, really, a statement of we've closed the change and we did it because we withdrew it. We didn't really need it. When you start from a largely blank slate in your organization, you're going to find that changing the culture is the hardest part. Getting the process written up, etc., not so hard. Right? So you're going to want to make sure that you enlist the people that are debunkers for the process right away, because these are the people that are going to be aiding on the process and spreading that joy to everyone. Make sure you have executive support. Without executive support, it's very difficult to get these kinds of processes off the ground. And of course, consider the CMDB, because without the CMDB, it's hard to wrangle the change process into the size that you would like it to be. Planning. When you're actually getting things in place for this process, how many people are going to be allowed to say yes for a certain kind of request versus no? How many do I need? How many votes must I need to tip the thing into the yes bucket? That seems trivial, but the truth is, you got to understand, does it have to be everybody who looks at the change from a technical perspective? Does it have to only be a certain number of people? Who can reject those requests is important too, right? We need to understand who's allowed to say no, and how many people will it take to say no before we say, yeah, we meant no, because we said no. So maybe it's one person who says no if it's a financial application. Maybe everybody has to say no, or half of them. Again, you got to determine that and the process that this will go through. So how many approvals are necessary and what triggers them? How do I know that this team or this group has to be involved? How do I know the technical review board is supposed to be coming in? Usually that's based on, as we said earlier, based on the scope of the change. But you just need to then understand, okay, what does the technical review board look like? What's it comprised of? If you have SOX compliance, Sarbanes-Oxley compliance, and many financial organizations in the U.S. do, then one vote no is enough to say no. Right? If it's a SOX board that you convene after the CAB, which you could do, a SOX board is basically going to trump everybody's vote. If it was yes all the way through the CAB, the SOX board can still look at it and say, no, the financial risks are too great, or it exposes us in the following way, or whatever the case may be, and they can deny the change. So this is a board of folks who could live even above the other changes that you do, even above the CAB, as far as their voting capability. But these folks would be invoked if the change was flagged as financial impacts. Right? It's going to impact our books. When you think about authorization levels, they're based on scope, right? So minor changes is a policy review, but technical changes need to, significant changes need a technical review. And of course, business review is done for our major changes. Changes that fall below minor, like the routine stuff, may not even get reviewed at all. It might just be a templated change request that's repeatable every time. It's already pre-approved. And that way you can just submit those requests as, hey, these are pre-canned changes. We do them all the time. We don't have to go through any approval process. Even the change manager doesn't have to look. And that way you still have documentation for everything that changed without bogging down the process too much for the trivial stuff, right? So as scope increases towards major, you start moving all the way up the food chain from an approval perspective. This is just the change manager. This is the actual technical review board, and here you move all the way through the CAB. If you get beyond this to financial impacts, of course, you'd have a SOX board. So the two folks not showing up on this are the people down here, or the auto approval process, really. And up here is the Sarbanes-Oxley group that might be involved if it's got financial impacts. More planning stuff. As you design your process, you want to think about the lead times for these changes. Right? How long should we allow or mandate, really, for major changes so that we can get it all planned? Industry standard is actually a month. Usually if I say a month, folks or scraping their jaws up on the floor, off the floor, right? So minimum of 3 weeks anyway. A month, again, is the standard. And that's not that crazy if you're going to be planning on taking down a critical business system for which you and your organization have heavy external exposure and or internal exposure. Right? If you're exposing a system to the external customer and you're bringing it down, the changes have got to go well because when you bring it back up, your external customers are going to be calling your service desk and overwhelming them when the system does not work. I know a bank that I work with has just recently changed their banking software, a major undertaking, and they had to put out communications to customers about how to log into the new banking system. They had to make sure that it worked when they logged in on the web and on their mobile devices. I'm sure that it was a nightmare, but personally, I experienced no issues with it, so they planned their changes pretty well. Major changes take some time. At least 2 weeks for significant changes. Right? These are changes that are ranked as significant based on my impact and urgency. A couple of weeks out is what I would expect. If you're filing earlier than that, then it may go into unscheduled. Right? If you're not giving me the full lead time. 1 week for minor changes. File it this week, do it next week. It's a minor change. I still want a little time. Standard changes typically have no lead time requirements. So these are the routine ones that we're talking about because you can file them today and do them tonight. They're automatically approved. And changes that don't meet the lead times are considered unscheduled. That's like we talked about before. Now I can comb out the unscheduled changes from the other changes in my bucket of changes in my system of record and see all the ones that were put through without enough lead time. And then you can start doing some correlation between those changes and, hey, what happened from an incident perspective? Right? How many incidents were opened against changes that had little lead time? And is that really where most of them come from? Or are they mostly major changes? Or are they mostly minor changes? This kind of data becomes huge if you build the process correctly because you can then start to have some insight and foresight into what you need to do from both a process perspective and from a management perspective of these changes and incidents and other things that may spawn from them. Unscheduled changes would go through an ECAB. You don't want to have to go to the bouncers, so don't do unscheduled changes. Some people change when they see the light. Others, when they feel the heat. If you put this in place, you must have policies to help make sure that people don't stray into the electric fence. Right? Policies are the electric fence. We don't want to necessarily have the voltage so high that we kill people with them. But depending on the nature of the systems that you're monitoring and controlling with the process, one violation may be enough to say, hasta la vista, baby. Right? Just depends on the nature of the systems and the stuff that is subject to change. When you are hosting for other customers, people who violate change processes are, zero tolerance because the other customer's livelihood is dependent upon those changes going flawlessly. And you just ruined maybe one or maybe multiple customers' livelihoods. So putting policies in place that have some teeth means that depending on the nature of the business you're running, whether it's small shop internally or just a few folks that are looking at it, or if you need very stringent policies because we're running folks that have major exposure to the outside world and the planet, those policies should help guide what the outcomes are to keep people on track. Remember the 7 R's of the change process because they're piratey. Who raised the change? Which is important because we need to know who actually raised the request, who brought this to our attention. What's the reason for doing this change? And why do I need to do this? How about why this and why now? What return is there going to be on the change? What do I get back for doing this thing now? Why is this so important again? What risks? Hey, I don't know how to put it back together, and it's one of our critical business systems. Those are risks. Right? We might not be able to turn it back on again come Monday. That's important to know. What resources do I need? This is not just people. This is also what resources do I need in the organization. Because, if I have to have the network down to do the change and another change is also happening that requires the network to be up, then those two changes can't happen at the same time. So we need to understand what they need in terms of internal resources as well as people. Who's responsible? Who's going to actually do the work? They're another resource, but are they available? Do they have resources that night? Right? Who's going to be here? Do they know what they're doing? Do they have the documentation? What relationships are there between the changes we're doing and other changes we're also doing? Because again, what resources do we need could be an important question. And if we're not managing releases, again, not software development releases, but just releases of all changes together, either in time, all changes happening in our 10 p.m. change window on Wednesday night, or in function, all changes required to deliver a particular capability to the organization. Those two types of releases are what we need to be able to control. And we want to do that by looking at the relationships between one change and the next. If this change requires that one, then those two have to go together. If these two changes are simply happening during our critical window, then we need to know that too. From an operations perspective, stay consistent, right? If you violate your own laws, if you're not consistent with how you approach folks, then it's going to lead to violations. People are going to automatically find themselves on the wrong side of the law. Take attendance at your CAB meetings. Make sure that the right people are in attendance and that the business is represented, or they sent someone who can act for that part of the business. If you don't have the primary or the secondary or the tertiary or a backup for them, then that group is not represented, and that means they might not be able to weigh in when they should have. Important to keep track of that. Develop important critical reporting to understand what's happening with the changes. And this is not really difficult to do. Remember, the system of record you use is going to report out the data you've chosen to capture. So any info you've put in, you should be able to get back out. How many changes did I process? How many were successful? How many failed? How many backed out? How many caused an incident? How many had unscheduled as a type, right? Failed changes by implementation team. That's a fun one for a wall of shame. Nobody wants to see their name on that one. Perform postmortems. Find out exactly how the changes went wrong. Make sure you do this not just on changes that went wrong, but also big changes that went right, so that we can understand and reinforce the positive behaviors that really worked well. Right? So, I recommend using tools. A lot of times tools will have a survey function inside of them, or another way of contacting people on a random basis. I would use that survey function and say, congratulations, you've been selected for a postmortem on your change. That way, all the high impact changes, even the ones that were successful, can have postmortems randomly selected for them. And then you can attend, and we can fix process, not blame. Develop a continuous improvement plan. If I don't, then the weaknesses in the process will not be fed back into benefits for the process, right? So we got to use our lessons learned, leveraging our reporting and our outputs to say, how do we make the process better than it was? How do we feed back our bad stuff into the beginning of the process so that it becomes good stuff? If people violate your policies, well, darn violators. What are we going to do about it is the question. Be diplomatically intolerant is the correct answer. You don't have to tolerate violations. You can decide what level of violation you're willing to tolerate. I know at one organization that I was at, because they did do hosting for some people externally, if you had one violation of the process, you had a permanent record stored in your own employment record about this. If you had two violations of the change process, you were given a 7-day no expense paid vacation. If you had a third violation, you were walked out the door. That was the end of it. So make sure that you use diplomatic intolerance, that is, co-measure with the nature of the business that you run, so that, if it's deadly serious stuff that we're doing, then it's deadly serious policy that we have in place, so that we don't expose ourselves as an organization. If you don't like change, you're going to like irrelevance even less. I'm sure that good old Eric probably thinks that's true for himself too. But in the end, folks who don't like change, the quote itself is still valid, right? If you don't like change, if you don't like doing it differently than you used to, then eventually become irrelevant. We don't have a real purpose. So folks in organizations who don't want to adhere to your processes or the policies you put forward are making themselves this way in the end. Finally, guys, critical success factors. If you're going to be successful, make sure that you develop policies, obtain executive support, and develop a communications plan so that you can get these things in place. Policies first, executives sign off on those policies, and you communicate all of these wins, all of the benefits, in an ever-escalating drumbeat. It just gets louder and louder as you get closer and closer to making the process official and announced in your organization. I want to thank everybody who took time out of their day to listen to us. We really appreciate that. If you have any questions or any other concerns, please don't hesitate to reach out to us. You can contact us at the information I have displayed on my screen, 1-844-FLYCAST, or you can email us at info@flycastpartners.com. With that, I'm going to turn it back over to Mr. Rich Longo to close things up. Thanks again, everybody, and have a great day.
Thank you, Greg, for another fantastic presentation. I appreciate everybody attending today. We had a very large number of folks that had registered for this today, so I want to thank each and every one of you. And I look forward to seeing you again next week for our service desk advocacy webinar. So please go sign up for that one. And until next week, have a great weekend.